What is up, folks? Today we are going to do something that I said we would do way back in April, and we're just now getting around to it. I completely forgot about this, but here we are. So we are going to be comparing the sensor of the Sigma FP to the red Komodo, and then the red Komodo with the Viltrox focal reducer attached. And then I thought, well, since I also now have the A7S III in my kit, well, we'll throw that in the comparison as well. So originally this whole idea was to compare full frame to the Super 35 of the Komodo, and then also full frame to a Super 35 with a focal reducer attached, which is always nice to kind of look at the differences, not only what a focal reducer does to the image, even though I've already reviewed that Viltrox focal reducer, but it'll be really nice to compare it to a real full frame camera. But the real observation is comparing the field of view and the differences of the depth of field. And then since it is now turned into 3 different camera sensors, well, now we get to compare different image renderings, skin tones, and things of that nature. And I tried my best to make this as much of a real-world test as possible because, you know, I have a very minimalist setup here, but I think it's nuanced enough to represent something that I would do on a real-world narrative shoot. Now, granted, I would probably be more nuanced than this even because I would have more room and, you know, my real gear and not just things that I keep in this little office for YouTube and things, but I think you get the idea. So we're gonna begin this test with the little Sigma FP. It's what I'm filming with right now, and attached to it is my Schneider Xenon full-frame cine lens, the 75mm T2.1, and it is ripped wide open at T2.1, and that is the lens we will use for all of the tests with each camera. Also, I'm making sure and getting the most that I can out of each camera, the highest quality codec. With one little caveat, unfortunately, I cannot use ProRes RAW because I am a DaVinci Resolve user, and that is the one codec that is just not compatible with InResolve. So not going to be able to look at ProRes RAW, but we will be able to look at just ProRes from the A7S III, as well as the highest internal H.265 that the A7S III offers. For the Sigma FP, I am outputting 4K DCI Blackmagic RAW 12-bit to the HDR video assist, and then obviously with the Komodo it will be the highest quality of 6K R3D. I'm gonna let you all observe and compare for yourselves and make sure that your settings are set to the highest 4K resolution and whatever you're viewing on. Happy holidays. This is gonna be a quick one, but I think there's a lot to maybe, I don't know, observe here. So we'll see you on the other side. This makes me think of old Joe. He was a crazy old man that lived in our neighborhood when we were kids. You remember him? He used to say there's 3 types of people in the world: fighters, sleepers, and crooks. One day my brothers and I, we were out in the street just doing kid stuff, and old Joe, he hobbles out there and he said, you boys are crooks. You're crooks. He said it was because we stole the joy out of the neighborhood, and that the adults forgot how to smile because of us. So obviously because of that, we had to terrorize him for the rest of his old ass life. Yeah. But one day, things got a little too rowdy, and poor old Joe, he fell down his front steps, and he did not get back up. He didn't make it out alive. Old Joe got his in the end. Well, my brothers, they definitely became crooks, as you know. And to me, I became something else. I seen you got a nice flight of stairs in front of your place, no? What time is it? Ooh. That phone call is only 12 hours away. I think you better get a fucking move on. I wouldn't suggest going out the front. We don't want to see a trip or anything. All right, folks, so I thought I'd jump in here on the back end and we can kind of talk through this together. I'll tell you the things that I observed. So, like, this was actually only the second time that I've used the HDR 12G Video Assist with the FP to get Blackmagic RAW. Because I have that 2 terabyte NVMe SSD for the FP, I usually just always do internal Cinema DNG. They're both 12-bit, by the way, so it actually does export 12-bit DCI 4K Blackmagic RAW via the HDMI. It doesn't output Blackmagic RAW, obviously, but it's outputting DCI 12-bit 4K, which is pretty awesome. The thing about Blackmagic RAW, if you look down here at the bottom, you can see like you don't have any control of these gamma controls over here, which is really odd. Whereas if I did this in actual Cinema DNG internally with the camera, or even, you know, I guess technically it would be external via the USB-C to a SSD, you would have control of this if it was Cinema DNG. So this is kind of the downside of, or a limitation of Blackmagic RAW with the FP. I just wanted to point that out. You can only control exposure. Here you can see though, I lifted it one stop because I want to point out, I guess technically this was a low light test. Technically I was one stop underexposed. My key light over here is a little tiny book light that I made with a Godox S30 bouncing into a beadboard, and then it was shooting back through a silk. And then I, you know, boxed it up with some negative fill, some Duvetine and flags and things all around it to stop it from spilling back here on this side to make sure it was just book lighting me. Then the perfect little eye light. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but the eye light was really perfect. That was from my little Roscoe Dash Dot. I did a whole video on that. It got slept on, as most of my lighting videos do, unfortunately. I guess people just aren't into the way that my lighting looks, but I think the tools that I use are very awesome, and so it's just, you know, to each their own. And then the edge light back here is the little small rig 220B. It's not a very awesome light. I just literally, it lives here in the YouTube studio because it's bicolor, and, you know, I wouldn't take a little rinky-dink light like that out on a real job, but I like that it's bicolor, and, you know, it's 220 watts of LED power, so it's pretty decent. But I was using the little baby aperture dome on it because I don't take that on jobs either because it's very small, so that just lives here in the YouTube studio as well. And if you look here at this BTS, you can see I had both the quarter grid and the 8-crate grid on that baby dome, but then also I threw a full net on the top half, so I was doing that to net some of this background down. And then the room tone back here, the ambient room tone, is just a softbox that's more like I use as a house light, but it's not a house light because it actually has real tungsten bulbs in it, and it's in a real softbox with a silk over it. So I only have film lights in the YouTube studio. So anyways, that softbox is just pointed up at the ceiling, and, you know, just 2 bulbs on, and it's just kind of doing the overall room tone. Okay, but I'm only explaining this all to you so you can understand, like, the key light was actually probably like a third of a stop under, because I had all these cameras at a very base generic ISO rating of 800. Okay, and I only did that because I'm comparing 3 different cameras here, right? So we have the FP, the Red, and then the A7S3. Well, what you can see here is, even though they were technically probably close to almost a full stop underexposed, I mean, look how well obviously the Red Komodo recovers extremely well being underexposed, but then look how well the FP recovers. This was the most, and has always been, the most amazing thing about the Sigma FP to me, is how well it can recover the shadows. And this is a true characteristic of RAW. Specifically raw cinema cameras, right? And why I say that is because it's very reminiscent of film, okay? Because film you always expose for the highlights, meaning that you're okay with letting the shadows go darker. You don't expose for the shadows with film, and that's the same way that you operate with RAW, especially digital RAW. Because what happens is, if you look at video codecs, like what the A7S3 is, this is a clear sign of a video camera. This is why all video cameras exposed to the right, otherwise known as ETTR, right? And it's just a horrible, shitty thing that's been a thing with video digital sensors since the dawn of digital sensors way back in the late 90s, okay? And this is a problem. They cannot retain shadows at all. I mean, look at this. Look at the face. Look at the skin tones. Look how much darker my eye sockets are. And they say, well, yeah, Justin, that's because you were shooting at ISO 800. But here's the thing. This camera is forcing you, because it's only one stop under, and not even a full one stop, right? It's probably like 3/4 under, right? That's nothing. That is nothing. The FP, and on my next video, or one of my next videos coming up, is I did a full-on latitude test, a real latitude test on the Sigma FP. You can go as low as 3 stops under with this thing, okay? And this is what I mean. This is the biggest thing that people don't realize, the biggest advantage of a cinema camera versus a video camera. And this is why I say, yeah, video cameras, you can see why Sony, even the FX6, cannot do internal RAW. And this is a big drawback of these cameras, because what is the point? You know, you're being forced to shoot at ISO 12,800. If I was to do that for this test, if I was to say, okay, I'm going to give the A7S III a special pass, right? And I'm going to shoot 12,000. Well, that means now I'm 4 stops overexposed, right? Because, you know, because actually from ISO 800 to 12,800, that's 5 full stops. But if we account for the 1 stop that it's already under, you say, okay, so it's only 4 stops over. 4 stops over is what that would have been. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to give a special pass to the Sony, because then, and plus, like, we're not going to really see, because, you know, again, technically this could have been a quote unquote, for the sake of argument, we'll just call it a low light test, but I don't think it was. I mean, barely 1 stop under for me that doesn't count as a true low light test, not in my opinion. I think it performed very poorly here. And this is a downside of video camera versus true raw cinema camera. So I really just wanted to point this out to you all. But again, you know, when you need that autofocus, it is beautiful. It comes in clutch. But here we're not using autofocus. This was with real cinema lenses, you know, and this is all the same lens, all the same ISO of 800, all the same camera settings, nothing changing here. And the Sony is just not holding up. And something interesting too, look at the Viltrox. Now, I barely used the Viltrox. I think this may have been the 4th time ever that I used the Viltrox. I just don't use it. I mean, look at the difference. This is the first time that I noticed the color shift. Notice the color shift that the Viltrox does. Some of it might be like, oh, you know, it could be technically you're getting almost a full stop of light more on the sensor, but it's shifting the colors. It really is shifting the colors. So if I go in here and we pull up the chromaticity, so notice the saturation of the Viltrox combination. And look at that. So much more colors, and it's shifted even. It shifted over a little bit. Let's pull up the vector scope and see if we can follow it there. So there's the Viltrox. Pay attention down here on the vector. There is a slight shift, but just interesting what's going on with the colors there. It is a little hard, you know, trying not to focus on the background because that's also affecting the scopes, you know, but it's really the face. It's just leaning a little, you know, it's doing something different to the skin tones that I wasn't hip to. Now, again, I should have prefaced this all by saying I specifically was not trying to match these cameras. I know it could have been confusing because I was doing like a little monologue, so people might see the monologue and go, wait, was he trying to match these cameras? Are these supposed to match? No, not at all. The whole point of this test, as what I was trying to get across in the intro of the talking head that I did for this video, is saying, like, we really want to compare the sensors. Because here's the thing. You look at any Hollywood movie, most Hollywood movies are captured on multiple cameras, especially if there's a lot of action scenes and stuff like that. So I have, you know, anyone, if they spend enough time in Resolve and if they're, you know, super talented and know their way around this program, yeah, if you spend enough time in here, you can match any camera with any camera to some extent, you know, and get pretty decent results. I had no desire in matching these 3 cameras for this test. It's not the point or the intent of this test. It was literally to see the performance of each one of these cameras. And in my opinion, Komodo and the FP are really shining. The Komodo without the Viltrox. This is why I never used it. I only kept the Viltrox around for like really dire situations. There was a time where I was shooting in Tony Hawk's private warehouse with some professional BMXers. And there it was like so low light with the Komodo, and the lenses that we were shooting on was like the Canon Cine lenses. And I was shooting on the fisheye, which is like a T3.5 or maybe even worse. So in those situations, I used the Viltrox. But, you know, that was probably, I think that was the only time that I used it professionally. And by professionally, I mean on a job that was paying me, you know, because otherwise, I mean, look at it. I just have no desire to use it. I don't care about the extra focal length. I'll just go on a wider lens, right? But in there, we were really limited because of I was only shooting on one lens that wasn't super fast. And I was trying to get as much light as I could on the sensor for that Tony Hawk thing. So even what it's doing to my face, you know, it's not keeping the shape of my face as well. You know, it's doing weird things. You know, it's a magnifier. You know, so it does weird things. It has some distortion to it. This is a good idea of full frame depth of field. And now you see just what you're paying attention to is look how much closer this little back shelf. You can really tell if you look at the white line, maybe look over here. These things look like they're right on top of me in the Komodo because it's compressed. Here, there's more distance, right? That's the depth of field. You get a greater depth of field with full frame. But now if we look at this, do you feel that? The last thing I want to talk about is the horrible, you probably noticed that I only used one ProRes clip from the Sony. This is a thing. This is the first time I ever used the A7S III with the 12G HDR Video Assist, but you know, I mainly use it with the Ninja 5, but it gets the same results. The ProRes that I get out of the A7S III with the HDMI output is always garbage. I've only ever used the ProRes for backup situations if something goes wrong inside the Sony. Because as you'll notice here, I shoot at the beefiest, best, heaviest codec inside the Sony because when I bought mine, it came with CF Express card. And so I've always used the XAVC SI codec, which is like 200 or 250 megabytes for normal frame rate. It's the beefiest codec. Surprisingly enough, it edits smoother than friggin' ProRes and it just looks better. The HDMI output of the A7S III never matches what's going on with the actual camera. So I feel like even though there's nothing being exported out picture profile wise, that camera is still sending something out via HDMI. And I can't explain it. I don't know what is happening to it. I don't know if there's something surprisingly missing in the menus that I just cannot find, or if this is a real phenomenon, because I've never seen this happen with any other camera and monitor recorder combo, okay? This is like so bizarre to me. It was already lifted on its own, and I had to bring it back down from this even. So this is what I'm saying. It's really bizarre, and it's just way more contrasty and crunchy. I mean, look at it. And actually, it's worse digital noise. It's like, it's really bad. It's so contrasty and weird. And this is why I never use it. And I hated it so much. I only use this one really short clip to just show, like, look how shitty the ProRes that you get out of that camera. So I really hope that the ProRes RAW is giving you better results than this. Again, I don't know. I can't tell because I love Resolve and I will never go back to Premiere, mainly because also that Resolve is the industry standard for color grading. Definitely with the ProRes is garbage in my opinion, but even this is just like, it's so weak of a performer compared to the Red and definitely compared to the little FP. I mean, that little FP, regardless if you like my and again, I didn't go ham on the color grade, okay? I just did a basic look on these, okay? Not a heavy grade, obviously, because I really just wanted to look at what the color sciences had to offer on their own, right? So I just brought the exposure back to normal. We did very slight tweaks, made sure the white balance and skin tones were somewhat accurate. So again, you can hate on my shitty grade all you want, but if you take the grade away, you cannot deny that the Red and the FP are still solid performers. And obviously everyone's color grade is going to affect this to some extent, but at the end of the day, color grade is not going to affect the true rendering of the skin tones in the face. Color grading is not going to change the depth of field. Color grading is not going to change how bokeh is rendered when you're looking at certain lenses or breathing or coma and those things. Color grading will never fix that. What I would really encourage you guys to do is really look at the performance of each of these, you know, and I mean, to me, the FP is like, wow. If this was a true battle video, I mean, the FP is maybe even better than the Komodo. I mean, it is just like, mainly, I think the FP has an insanely cinematic, it's almost, dare I say, airy status, right? Like there's something magical going on with that camera. The downside is it's very tiny. You gotta really have it stabilized because it's so tiny. That's kind of the biggest downside of that camera. When you have such a lightweight camera, it really is susceptible to micro jitters and things of that nature and also complications with rigging and things, right? Like if they could have just figured out a way to give it more weight, to give it a little bit more girth, you know, because the Komodo is significantly heavier than the FP. Therefore, you can run around and do more fun handheld stuff with it, where the FP, as most of you made well aware on my spent video, you know, micro jitters was a big thing that people noticed the most. And for 75% of that spent film, I was using a monopod, you know, so it just is what it is. You know, you barely touch that camera and it goes berserk. But also, it is a cinema camera and it needs to be treated as such. And I tried to say this with every FP video I do. Even when I'm out doing street photos with the FP, I am always underexposing that thing because the highlights just go. And the Komodo is also no exception to that. Anytime your traffic lights come on your Red camera, for overexposure,
I would never accept that. As soon as a traffic light comes on the overexposure side, I go, what is that? Is there a spectral highlight? Okay, if it's a spectral highlight, fine. But if it's anything else, no. Bring that back down. Figure out how to bring it down. Because the reality is these cinema cameras that shoot internal RAW, they're operating much almost very akin, well, I should say they're handling the light much like how analog film does. You have to expose for the highlights, right? Because you can always protect the shadows. But therefore with these video cameras, nope, expose to the right? You have to expose for your shadows because this is, blech. You know, like look what happens. And they say, well, yeah, you should have shot at the second base ISO. That wasn't the point of this test, right? As always, thank you all for the support. Thank you to all of my Dog Times Patreon members. We got some awesome new things cracking over there. I wish you all a very happy holidays. Be safe for the new year. And when we come back, well, buddy, it'll be on a whole new one. All right, take care.
All right.
That's so fucked up. I don't know, the image quality looks good. It's like, I love the image quality of the red. You can just tell the difference, but it's like, whoa.